Hey everyone, I'm back from touring new spots for the tavern to be located at, because that's a project I'm working on, which is not stressful at all. But you know what? The work waits for no one, like I said last week. And this week, we are going to be working on D&D combat. D&D combat is something people talk about a lot on D&D YouTube. Everyone talks it to death. And you know what? For good reason. D&D combat, I think, can be really fun, but oftentimes it is monotonous. And when it's monotonous, oh boy, howdy, do you, especially as the dungeon master, do you notice? Because when the players aren't engaged, man, you feel that like 5 times over. And often it's happening during combat. So how do you stop it from happening? How do you make your combats better? Well, there's an answer that's given by basically all of D&D YouTube, and that answer is narrative. Incorporate story and roleplay into your combats to make them more engaging for your players. And, well, I think this is good advice. I also think, and I don't really know how to say this without sounding like a dick, but I also think that it is kind of the bare minimum, especially in narrative-heavy, roleplay-heavy games. And obviously, very unhelpful for games where narrative and roleplay are not exactly the top priority for the DM or the players. I think that there's an extra layer of advice to give here, and that advice doesn't ignore the mechanics of combat or sideline them in favor of roleplay. I think that advice should be to focus on those mechanics, to incorporate them in, and have them work together alongside your roleplay. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, first, let's talk about the typical answer, the advice of adding narrative weight to combat. This is good advice. And if you're playing a roleplay heavy game, you should do this. I mean, there is nothing that gets my players hyped up more than saving an NPC they love in combat. That's one very specific example, but it's one that is just in my head because it's something that happened recently. And when my party were trying to save the NPC, let me tell you, man, they were really engaged. They were engaging in the combat differently. They were trying to support this NPC, this person. Their healing spells were being used way more frequently than normal, and giving them essentially something to protect and escort. That changed the dynamic. Now, I'm going to be talking about that more in the future, but beyond just changing the objectives players are doing in combat through roleplay, you can also literally roleplay with them during combat. I know that rounds are supposed to be 6 seconds, and roleplaying during combat can kind of break the immersion of that, but I think you can let it go to have some fun moments during a battle. I mean, some of my most memorable video game moments come from people crap talking me during a fight. I mean, Baldur in God of War 2018, this guy is a really cool villain. But a big reason why he worked was because he couldn't shut up during a fight. Like, he talked a lot, and it wasn't annoying by any means. They paced the lines out very well, but it gave him so much personality. This character that we literally just met and just punched Kratos into the sky, him talking crap during the fight, that made him so much more of an interesting character. I think God of War in general does this very well with all their bosses throughout the franchise. If these guys were silent, they have so much less personality. I think that role-playing during combat is a tool that a lot of DMs forget to use, including me, because I'm focusing on so much stuff, I can't really come up with good lines during combat. This was a major regret of my final fight against Vecna, the Nightmare King, the final boss of my second D&D campaign. That was like a 3-hour boss fight. An amazing boss fight, but it was a fight where Vecna didn't have a lot to say. I didn't have any lines written out beforehand, and now I've changed my ways on that. When my party fight a boss that they're familiar with, a boss with a lot of personality, then I write down the lines. I give them some lines beforehand, and I understand that some DMs might be uncomfortable with that. Isn't that scripting? Well, not really. I mean, I just give myself some pointers, some ideas, some feelers as to the character, so that when I am playing the character in the moment, I have a ballpark of what to say. I'm not saying you should script out combat or anything, but I do think you should give yourself something to say because it gives your villains more personality and makes the combat more engaging. Having a back and forth with your bad guy as you're fighting them in battle is cool. My bottom line is this: videos that talk about adding more narrative depth to combat and go on to give advice on that strategy, they're right. If you're playing in a roleplay heavy or narrative heavy game, or even one where those elements are simply just present, not necessarily heavily incorporated, I think that this is good advice. But oftentimes, I hear those same videos dismiss another major key aspect of the game that I think is a mistake. I think that these people are missing out because oftentimes they dismiss the mechanics, some of them even treating the mechanics of the game like an obstacle that gets in the way of the role-playing, which I think is a mistake. D&D, for all of its faults, is a game where you have narrative and mechanics. They're supposed to work together. One shouldn't get in the way of the other. And obviously, at your tables, you can play however you want. But I think a lot of people miss out on just how cool mechanics can be, especially when they're married to narrative. So let's talk about how to make combat more action-oriented. Yeah, I just ripped Matt Colville. I do that a lot. Look, Fleet Immortals by Matt Colville is a book I can't shut up about, and for good reason. It's a good one. Matt Colville incorporates something called action-oriented monsters into this book. Monsters that are more engaging, that aren't just bags of hit points, that have a lot more to do in battle, and he did a really, really good job. I think that this is 10 out of 10 game design, especially for D&D, and I can recommend it for anyone. His video on action-oriented monsters during running the game is one of the best D&D videos ever made, bar none. And it goes in depth in a similar way to those videos that talk about narrative solutions to combat. Colville is talking about mechanical solutions to combat. And frankly, he's way better at it than I am because he is actually a game designer who knows what he's talking about, and I'm some idiot who read his book. I'm not trying to downplay myself, I'm literally just telling the truth. Matt Colville does this too, but I do it a lot, and I actually add more of these elements to his monsters through my own homebrew. But a big reason why I think D&D combat can be really passive is because a lot of the consequences are suffered passively. Like, for example, when a dragon uses its breath attack, it just uses it, and you either make the saving throw or you don't. There's nothing really the players can do on their turns to prevent themselves from getting whammied by the dragon breath attack. It just kind of happens. Like, yeah, the players can intentionally spread out throughout the combat, but eventually that kind of just fades into the background. It feels like the combat isn't dynamic. Things aren't happening throughout it. You just kind of do your thing and hope the dragon doesn't find a way to line you guys up and pray that the dragon doesn't recharge their breath attack. You know, that's what you're doing a lot of the time in D&D combats. Stuff just kind of happens. But I think that combat can be changed so that instead of things just happening, players can take a more active role in mitigating the bad guy's offensive. Like, for example, these are monsters I designed called Thayan. You know, like the Red Wizards of Thay. They summon creatures called Thayan Thrall. Thrall are minor little minion enemies, courtesy of Fleet Immortals, that essentially act as small guys the players can easily take down. They are killed extremely easily to the point where I can confidently throw 20 of these guys at my players and know with complete certainty that they will win that fight. These guys are a joke. However, the main role they serve is not as actual enemies. Yeah, they deal damage and you have to kill them, but their main role is as a battery. See, other Thayans, mainline Thayans that actually take time to take down, they use these Thrall like batteries. The Thrall empower the Thayans' attacks, making them more powerful, making them deal certain status conditions, etc., etc. For example, this Thayan abomination, when two Thralls nearby, can use them to knock a target prone or to poison them, or both. Essentially, the Thayans have combos. They use the Thrall to set up these combos and therefore deal more damage to players or inflict more status conditions. And notice how there's not a lot of talk of saving throws on these stat blocks, because instead of saving throws, I have set up a condition. If this, then this. If there are two Thralls nearby the enemy, then the enemy is poisoned. How does this change combat? Well, This makes the prevention of the poisoning effect, for example, more active. Instead of the player just rolling a save and either making it or not making it, the players now can change their strategy. They need to take down the thrall. Crowd control is now incentivized, and a major element of taking down Thayans. Thayans rely on these hordes of thrall to take down their enemies. Therefore, if the players want to effectively counter them, they can prepare spells that center around crowd control. Clerics with Spirit Guardians can fold Thayans in half, no problem at all. Now, I understand that this might be a lot. You're making whole stat sheets here, but you don't need to do that. It can be as simple as just recharging an enemy's attack at the top of the round rather than at the start of their turn. Like, when my players fight a dragon, I don't roll the breath attack recharge at the start of the dragon's turn. I roll the breath attack recharge at the start of the round. This gives players who rolled high in initiative, who have high dexterity, a chance to run away. Now the players know for certain, okay, the breath attack is coming, it is ready, let's spread out. It makes the combat more dynamic and incentivizes the players to, like, listen to me when I say something like, fire billows from the dragon's maw as flames curl out their lips. You know with almost utmost certainty the barrage of flames incoming. Now, when players hear that, and they are high in the initiative, they are rewarded for both listening and speccing into high initiative or high dexterity builds. Another thing I like doing is I change layer actions to just be passive effects that happen across the battlefield. Like, now, the entire battlefield is difficult terrain, and it will remain difficult terrain until X thing happens. Again, taking out the passivity. Instead of having a saving throw associated with this difficult terrain crap, now the players need to actively go to a location and stop something from happening. For example, this difficult terrain effect being fueled by a tower that's making an earthquake all across the battlefield that the players now need to disable, maybe through a skill challenge, or maybe just by destroying it with a certain attack. Again, this is still utilizing the base mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons. You're still using spells, you're still making attack rolls, but there is a tactical element to it now. It's a small thing, small changes, but they can be a big deal. Obviously, if you do a lot with this design philosophy, you're going to get a lot more out of it. I mean, I designed whole stat sheets around this design philosophy, and I think that it's made my games way better. I mean, a couple months ago, I had the best boss fight I've ever had. It was a vampire fight that utilized this design philosophy with lots of effects the players could interact with and mitigate. It was a long fight, but it was epic. It was awesome. We were all sweating and screaming, and it was amazing. And yes, it had narrative weight, but on top of that, there were mechanics that the players could interact with at the same time. Both were relevant to making an amazing combat. I mean, heck, I was talking about conditions earlier. Maybe you can use narrative to enhance that. Like, for example, a villain is drawing upon the life force of a hostage to empower their attacks, giving them like 1d6 extra necrotic damage per melee spell attack. And now the players need to find a way to take the hostage out so that the villain is no longer drawing on their life force. But oh no, it's an NPC the players really love and they don't want to kill them. So now they're going to tank the hits from the boss in order to make sure this NPC stays alive. There's narrative weight there. Narrative marrying mechanics. Look, I don't want to be one of those guys who tells you how to play D&D or any tabletop role-playing game. If you don't care at all about making combat more intense or more engaging and you're happy with the way your games are playing, good. Go do your thing. But again, I think people are missing out, man. Like, I get really bummed when people dismiss the mechanics of combat as just something that's tacked onto the narrative or as an obstacle, like I said earlier. That bums me out because, again, my fights are so epic because both of these things are in play. If that vampire fight I mentioned earlier was just in a gray void with no cool map effects, no mechanics for the players to interact with, just them versus a bag of hit points, there's no amount of narrative that's going to make up for that. It's going to be boring no matter what. I mean, yeah, they hate this bad guy a lot. He's tied into one of the players' backstories, and he's got a cool persona. But if he's a bag of hit points with another multi-attack, he doesn't mean anything to them. He is not engaging. I frankly understand, by the way, why people focus on narrative as a solution to this, because I think that that is an avenue that most people join D&D for. Like, most people don't join D&D because they have an enthusiasm for game design. Most people don't join D&D obsessing over which World of Warcraft raid boss is better than the other based on the mechanics of the fight. Like, most people don't care about that kind of thing, all right? And you know what? That's fine. I'm one of those people too. I got into DMing because of Critical Role. I'd played D&D before with my World of Warcraft guild, but I started DMing and telling stories because of Critical Role, a very narrative-heavy RPG game. But as I continued playing, and as I kept on using narrative and improving my narrative throughout my campaigns, I felt like I wasn't doing enough. And when I got Flea Mortals, my eyes were open to the truth. The truth is, at least to me, the truth is that mechanics are not an obstacle. They are a help. They are just as important as narrative in these games. I mean, it is a game, after all, that you are playing. And using both is a great way to make such an epic experience for both yourself as the dungeon master as well as the players. You don't need to write whole stat sheets. You can start small. Just move the recharge of abilities throughout the combat to the top of the round to give your players time to prepare for them. Maybe change 1 or 2 layer actions to have a more active prevention mechanic rather than just a saving throw. Maybe that ability is enhanced by some kind of trash mob that joins the fight. Or maybe you just add trash mobs in general to make it so that your players are focusing on more than one target during combat. Small things, but again, they make a big difference. And who knows, maybe because of these small things, you get into the weeds of game design and learn how to make your own stat sheets, and we can have even better D&D combats all together as a unified collective, worshipping at the feet of Flea Mortals. God, I really like that book. Probably a little bit too much. I promise one of these days I'll stop talking about it. I mean, I can't really promise that because it's been like 2 years, but soon. I don't know, maybe after this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Whenever I talk about combat, I actually get a lot of crap for it, so I'm not really looking forward to the comments on this one. I get told constantly that I'm a very annoying person when I talk about combat, so I'm really sorry if I annoyed you. I promise there won't be a combat-oriented Tabletop Tavern tips video for a while, but in any case, if you guys did enjoy this, then please do leave a like or a dislike. They both help me out. If you want to see more of our content, then you can check out our Shadow over Carconos D&D podcast. If you want to see some of my combats in action, these aren't exactly current crispy combats since they were like a year plus ago, but they're still pretty good. You can check that out. It's linked in the cards. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment Narrative X Combat to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell. Oh, you gotta turn on my microphone. Give me a sec. Alright. Coming back.